We often read in the comments that the bikes and components we review are typically on the more expensive side. So today I've got something at the more affordable end of the spectrum. It costs $1,500 and features an own branded one by Groupset that's not from Shimano, SRAM or Campagnolo. Yes, you heard that right, a Groupset that isn't from one of the big three. This is the State Undefeated, an affordable disc brake road bike from the burgeoning American brand, who are best known for making track and single speed urban bikes. The Undefeated is currently only available in the USA, but the brand says it can ship globally. Before I dive into the tech and give you my final verdict, if you like this type of content, why not click on the little bell icon and subscribe to our channel. State says the Undefeated is designed as a first-time performance road bike, suitable for training and travelling, and also points to its aluminium credentials as a crit bike. Cutting a traditional looking silhouette, the Undefeated shuns modern design features such as drop seat stays or alternative welding methods. The frame uses Y9 aluminium, which State says is 6061 aluminium infused with titanium. It's said to allow the brand to achieve a thinner wall thickness and shaving weight. State also claims the addition of titanium improves tensile strength. The fork is full carbon and is produced by SRAM USA. 12mm for axles are used front and rear, as are flat mount disc brakes, and tyre clearance is rated 700 by 28mm. State offers 5 sizes from 49cm to 62cm to fit riders from 5 foot to 6'6". I'm 5'11" and test a 58cm. I typically ride a 56cm in most brands, but looking at State's geometry chart, the 55cm would have been too small. On the scales of truth, my test bike weighs in at 9.75 kilograms, a little under the claim weight of 9.95 kilograms. For those wondering, State claims the frame set on its own weighs 2,155 grams. Let's take a look at the geometry. The Undefeated's geometry is, for the most part, on the relaxed side for a machine with half an eye on crits, although it's not without its quirks. The stack is generous at 584mm and the chainstay length is 425mm on all sizes. For comparison, the Campagnolo CAD 13 has a 575mm stack and 408mm chainstay lengths in a size 56cm, and the Specialized LA Sprint is even racier at 558mm stack and 410mm chainstays. The wheelbase on the Undefeated is also fairly long at 1019mm, which should, in theory, increase stability, though in practice, its race-oriented ride didn't seem to correlate with this. The 73-degree head tube angle is fairly middle of the road for road racing bikes, and the reach is 397mm, which is longer than the 389mm on the Campagnolo CAD 13 and almost equal to the 398mm on the LA Sprint. The 580mm seat tube length is very tall compared to the 540 and 530mm measurements on the CAD 13 and LA Sprint. We've got videos on both the CAD 13 and LA Sprint on the channel with links in the description if you want to see more about these bikes. Although the geometry is decidedly more on the relaxed side than its competitors, State designs the frame around a short 90mm stem length, which is spec'd on all sizes. A shorter stem will typically make the steering quicker, but you'd expect most road bikes of this size to be spec'd with 100 or 110mm stems. My personal sweet spot is 110mm, as I prefer the more neutral steering, but of course this is bike dependent. So how does the State Undefeated ride? Well, I found it to offer a reasonably stiff ride that pushes you to ride faster, the frame springing to life as you ask for more. That said, it's more comfortable than I envisaged, and that's with the stock Maxxis detonator tyres, which aren't particularly supple. It's hard to definitively judge the ascending and descending abilities of the Undefeated, given the unusual gearing and braking specs, both of which I'll come on to later. You can certainly feel the weight of the bike when climbing, with the heavy stock wheels and one by Groupset holding back the Undefeated's ascending potential. It's not a particularly poised bike to descend on either. It's definitely on the nervier side. I'd attribute this partly to the shorter stem length, but I also had to keep the fact I was riding Tektron's C550 mechanical disc brakes at the front of my mind when descending. The paint scheme is one of the highlights of the bike. Gloss white with arresting tie-dye graphics. Just look at the State graphic on the down tube, it's a real head turner. Although white is far from an ideal colour to keep scrupulously clean, particularly here in the UK as well, at least it's a gloss finish, so dirt won't show up quite as much. Scratches on the gloss finish can also be polished out to a degree if necessary, unlike matte. The internal cable routing of the frame is also not the quietest, particularly for the rear brake cable. The entry points on the down tube and underside of the bottom bracket are quite small, and it would be a challenge to fit a foam protector over the outers. The frame uses a BB86 press fit bottom bracket standard. It was creak free throughout the test, and of all the press fit standards, it's one of my preferred ones. If the bonanza of bottom bracket standards tickles your tech hunger, why not check out Simon von Bromley's video where he argues press fit is better than threaded, and the link for that is in the description. Right, let's move on to the group set. The State Undefeated is built around sensor shifting components that are rebranded as State items in a one-by setup. However, the chain set is State's own. The cassette is from Sunrace and the chain is from YBN. The shifters are Shimano-like in shape with similarities to SRAM's double tap shifter layout. And there's some texturing on the hoods too, although the rubber isn't as tacky as Shimano or SRAM's. If you just have to get a mainstream group set, then State says you can upgrade the shifters or rear derailleur to SRAM's 11-speed range, and it would be compatible with the bike's stock components because they use the same cable pull ratio. The shifting quality is better than expected, although there's significantly less lever throw required to initiate a shift compared to SRAM. It also has less of a definitive action, but there is slightly more feedback compared to a Shimano shifter. I found it easy to accidentally downshift on the State shifters due to the reduced lever throw. This isn't an ideal shifter to use if you hesitate between shifts, because it will just chuck you into a harder gear. The gear cable is routed on top of the lever body, so you can feel it under the shifter hood. It creates an annoying bump on the edge of the hood, which I found uncomfortable on longer rides. The problem could be further exacerbated due to the fact that the in-house Black Label handlebar is quite narrow in diameter, either side of the conventional 31.8mm clamping area. Let's talk about the Tektro C550 mechanical disc brakes. They're the real low point of the build, lacking power and modulation. These brakes are a dual piston design, unlike the more commonplace single piston design on the majority of mechanical disc brakes. The C550s are an OEM version of the brand Spires, which you might have heard of, and being a dual piston design, that means they should offer more consistent braking, but unfortunately they didn't. I had to plan to stop in advance of the C550s and some technical descents were on the nervy side because I had to remember I was using brakes that wouldn't stop me with anywhere near the finesse of a hydraulic system. I'm yet to test any mechanical disc brakes that can compare to their hydraulic equivalents. It's not unreasonable to expect hydraulic disc brakes at this $1,500 price point either. It's about the entry point for hydraulics, and a Shimano Tiagra 10-speed hydraulic disc brake group set would have been a stronger spec choice. Am I wrong? What do you think of mechanical disc brakes? Let us know in the comments. On the plus side, the C550s were relatively easy to set up. However, they have quite a tight clearance and there is a trade-off between the amount of lever throw and the point at which the rotor rubs the pads. The State-branded Senza rear derailleur shifts without fuss and a surprisingly little play. Cheaper derailleurs often have some play at the pivot, which results in inconsistent shifting, but that isn't the case here. The derailleur cage is shorter than a Shimano GS or SRAM's Y-Fly though, and the easiest 32 tooth cog on the cassette really is the limit for the derailleur, and that's with the B-gap on the rear derailleur fully wound in. The State-branded chain set is heavy but functional, and the YBN chain meshes nicely with the Sunrace cassette. Let's move on to the one-by drivetrain spec choice. State has spec'd a 46-tooth chainring paired with an 11 to 32-tooth cassette. On paper, it would seem that the gear ratios are aimed at crit racing. However, State says it wants to spec a one-by system, and I quote, for simplicity's sake, and that the 46-tooth chainring is a good compromise for speed and climbing. This just wasn't the case. In testing, the 46-32 bottom gear was far from an ideal climbing gear, and I found myself out of saddle very early on some of the lumpier roads around Bristol and the Chilterns. If you live in a flatter area, the gear ratios may better suit your riding, although on the flip side you then spin out the 4611 hardest gear on descents quicker. The frame can accept a front derailleur, although the Senza offering lacks a trim function. In any case, if you were to convert to 2x, you would need to buy a new shifter because the Senza's brake lever spec doesn't have a shift function. An upgrade to SRAM's hydraulic disc brake shifters would sort the shifter ergonomics and improve the braking, but it would prove an expensive upgrade and you'd still have the other quirks to deal with. In terms of general performance, the Groupset is, on the whole, better than I envisaged. The big three of Shimano, SRAM and Campagnolo dominate to such an extent that it's rare to see shifting components from another brand. But the State's Groupset is not without its quirks. Now let's move on to the wheels and finishing kit. The Aluminium wheels are State branded with 28 spokes, a 25mm deep rim and narrow 16mm internal rim width. State says the wheels are tubeless ready. They're sturdy but unremarkable, and they'd be another component I'll upgrade down the line. The Maxxis detonator tyres aren't particularly supple or sophisticated. They come up very narrow at 27.36mm for their 700 by 28mm width on the State branded rims. I'd say you could likely fit a 30mm tyre without issue on the stock wheels. I would say that the tyres didn't detonate in testing, and that's true until last night when I managed to wreck the front tyre, so as you can now see, there is a Pirelli tyre on the front. On paper, the 31.6mm diameter seat post shouldn't offer as much compliance as a skinnier 27.2mm one. But in testing, I didn't find it overly harsh. An upgrade to a carbon post would add a bit of squish for the delicate among you. A black label saddle is fitted on top of the seat post, and it's got a fairly long nose and not a great deal of padding. I found it uncomfortable on anything over 2 hours. However, saddle choice is a personal thing. So who is the State Undefeated for? That's a hard question. I'd argue it aligns most closely with the needs of a crit racer, although the spec choices are wanting in some areas and the gear ratios are limiting in hilly terrain, or if you're looking to unlock top speed. In this build, the Undefeated feels built for the crit racer on a budget, which is admittedly a very limited audience. If I was going to own the Undefeated, I'd opt for a frame only, which retails for $699.99. With some smart component choices, you could build yourself a high-performing bike for not a lot of cash. The frame is a quality item worth hanging some more lost-worthy components off, and you could build a bike with greater versatility. That said, the frame is always the heart of a bike, and I'd rather a brand compromise on the components rather than the frame. And you can always upgrade parts down the line. What do you think of the State Undefeated? Would you ride a Groupset that isn't Shimano, SRAM or Campagnolo? Let us know in the comments. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and if you want to see more of our road bike reviews, why not start with this video?